Good Tuesday morning. Today is interesting in the literature. It's the same basic theme, of course, but he's now the writer is encouraging the Jewish Christian community to persevere, because the temptation is to defect when things get bad, when the cost of discipleship, put it that way, when the cost is high in discipleship. There must have been a huge temptation in the time of the literature of the Hebrews in the first century of the church. That defection must have been very, very real because the price was so high. Often it meant martyrdom, or at least the estrangement from families and culture and community, especially for Jews who became Christians. The price was astronomical. The temptation would have been to give it up and go back. And he's saying to stay with it. He said, he's saying about Christ, it gives you an example. I'll read it. He's giving you the example of Christ persevering despite it all. In what? What he saw lay ahead. That he had to endure the cross, okay? He said, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us rid ourselves of every burden and sin that clings to us and persevere, that's the kicker line, in running the race that lies before us while keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus, the leader and the perfecter of faith. For the sake of the joy that lay before him, Jesus endured the cross, despising its shame. Boy, just think about it. If you were a Jew, the shame you must have felt if you got cut off from your family because you became a Christian. And has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne, the glorified Christ. Consider how he endured such opposition from sinners, in order that you may now not grow, in order that you may not grow weary and lose heart. See? He went before us, suffering the rejection. Don't lose heart. See what it's saying? In your struggle against sin, and sin doesn't mean missing Mass on Sunday or eating meat on Friday, despite the canon lawyers. What it meant was betrayal, to give up the faith. The sin is to give up on Christ and to go back. See? In your struggle against sin, defection, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. It's a hell of a line, isn't it? You have not yet been murdered. Stay with it. See? Stay with it. Yeah. It must have been brutally tough to be a Christian at that time, especially if you were a Jew. What it must have cost. And the temptation to give it up, forget about it, and go back must have been overwhelming at times. I'm sure of it, actually. And I wonder if we're not in the new age now. You and I, if you're old like me, we lived in a very comfortable Christian age. It was, as one of my atheistic friends put it 40 or 50 years ago to me, it was a snotty guy. He was a guy from England, beautiful man, I loved him, but it could be really a snot. Peter Wainwright. I love his dad now. I heard he died a few years ago, but Peter said it's fashionable to be Christian. He was not praising it. It's fashionable to be Christian. I remember that him saying that. Why? Because Kennedy had just been elected president. It was fashionable. See, it ain't fashionable no more. No, it's not. Now, as our culture is radically secularizing itself, not completely, but substantially, it gets more and more difficult to be Christian and to be an active Christian, active member of the faith. In the past, you could slip slide in the wind. Yeah, I'm a Christian. I was raised a Catholic. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Today, you can't say, well, I was raised a Catholic. You know what I mean? I go to church a couple of times a year. You know what I mean? I'm making fun of my neighbor. I'm making fun of my history, my past. That would have been a line that I grew up with. Today, it's not that way. Kids say, I don't believe anymore. See? Or they say, they really believe. What you don't see is that slip sliding in the wind because the culture won't tolerate it. The culture is warring against Christianity now. It's radically secularizing. Hence, you have to choose, do you believe or don't you? And it isn't to believe in the Pope or something like that. Either you believe, it's more fundamental. Do you believe in Christ? Do you or don't you? You see, the culture won't allow it. Actually, the good news is it forces us to choose rather than just going along with the tide. The bad news is, and it's sad, is as we de-Christianize our culture, the moral code also gets diminished. that because Christianity lays at the very foundation of Western humanism, and the humanism descends into politicalism as opposed to really true humanism. I see that as the ultimate danger. So as much as I want to see the radicalization of the faith in terms of you have to choose, that I agree with. Actually, it's just like in the letter to the Hebrews, you got to put your money where your mouth is. On the other hand, the culture could become not just inimical to Christians, but become self-destructive within itself. You know, any history of the world or history of cultures, once a culture loses its moral and spiritual foundations, it generally self-destructs. You see nations do it. It self-destructs. Because the fiber of the nations held together not by just a merely constitutional law and those type of things, or monarchies, but especially constitutional law, which I totally believe in and support. Okay, totally. Thank God for the American Constitution, trust me. But on the other hand, there's a humanism and a Judeo-Christian humanism that underlay it. You diminish that, you weaken the understanding of the humanism that undergirds the Constitution. And you start to get rights that are merely political rights instead of deeply, profoundly human rights. And that's a cardinal danger. That's an extreme danger. And I fear for that. Not for me. I'm old, I'm dead, I'm finished. But I wonder what our grandchildren will inherit. As far as a moral culture, a national moral culture, I don't mean by that, you know, a legalistic culture, but a deep commitment to human dignity. Not political dignity, but human dignity. And human rights at a deep level, deeper and more morally better founded morally than mere political a whim. I don't trust a politic that gives rights. Let me say it another way. I don't trust a government that gives me rights. I trust only a government who protects my rights. See, and our rights are rooted in Judeo-Christian vision of human dignity. When you erode that foundation, you run the risk of the politicalization of the moral order. We are certainly running that at this time. On the abortionist is very clear. You see, what constitutes a human person? Choice? That somebody can choose it? All you got to do is look at the Dred Scott case of 1854, what they said about blacks and African Americans. It's very easy politically to sell out a whole element of people unless there is such a radical foundation, moral foundation to the political order. Now, I don't mean it has to be Christian or Judeo-Christian or Muslim, but it has to be more fundamental even than the morality, and it has to focus on human dignity. You see, it has to become a foundation to human dignity and human rights, not rooted in the politic and in the Constitution, but in human nature itself. So that it is the dignity of being human that girds and undergirds the right to political freedoms and political rights, and hence the Constitution. Our founding fathers saw it that way, I think. I'm almost sure, but I'm pulling my punch here. I worry about the long term, that the de-Christianization of the West and in a sense that's, maybe put it this way, it's radical secularization could in the end so radicalize the morality that it will weaken the democracy by eventually selecting out who is human and who isn't. Yes, I don't only put it because I already see it taking place. The unborn, for one, but you can also see it for the elderly. That could be a possibility. We face a situation in this country where we're going to be upside down. There's going to be more people over 65 by a huge amount than under 65. We're going to be very expensive. Okay? I don't have to go further. What happens to somebody who's now so senile that they don't even know their own name? What happens to people just down the road? The possibility when the state says who's human, that's extremely dangerous. That could never happen in a Judeo-Christian moral framework because all people are human. All are to be protected as such. You see, whether you're unborn or you're elderly, it makes no difference. And I mean, I think we're playing a high-stake game right now. I worry about it. Not me. I don't care what happens to me. I'm too old to care. But it's the future I care about for our children and our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, the future of our culture.